Hello and welcome to Newspeak, the New Culture Forum's look at the weekly news agenda. We had a bit of a gap last week, but we're back now in the dog days of summer. I'm very pleased to, as usual, be joined by our senior fellows, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, historian and war commentator, and Dr. Philip Kiszley from Leeds. We're going to be talking about, well, first of all, you might be one of them, but there's something like 2.5 million people now on long-term sickness benefits. Is that really plausible? Then we have in Germany, the AfD Party, there are calls for it now, actually from on high, to be banned. And finally, you might have seen that our good friend in City Hall, Sadiq Khan, has been crowing about a new festival of black culture called Black on the Square, which is going to be with us shortly. So we're going to be looking at a wide variety of things this week, starting with this extraordinary figure, actually, Philip, 2.5 million people on long-term sickness benefits in this country. In other words, people of workable, working age. Yeah. Do you think that this, first I want to say a genuine figure, it's obviously a genuine figure, but do you think this is kind of still one of the results of COVID? Or do you think there's been a cultural change? People just don't want to work anymore?
I think there has been a cultural change. I think there's a generational thing going on as well. I think lots of young people don't want to work because they see quality of life. They see that they often don't need to work because financially they don't have to, and they just want to do other things. I come across that all the time. But I think the post-COVID thing, yes, is really important. I'm not quite sure of the demographics here. I've just talked about young people. There will be an element of that, but the idea of sickness, the idea of being on benefits, being on sickness benefits, is probably older people. And I just wonder if it's the kind of people who would be working in the public sector. I don't know. I'm saying
you're just speculating, are you?
I'm speculating, but right. It might well be that long COVID thing of staying at home and doing that kind of thing. I don't know. I've got no idea, but I'm just flabbergasted by the insane number. Something's happening.
Is this something to do with, there's been suggested that there's just been an increase in physical and mental ill health?
Well, 400,000 of the 2.5 million are getting benefits for anxiety and other mental health issues like that, along with other things like problems with your wrist, carpal tunnel syndrome and all the rest. Now, what sort of checks go through? Because we've also had it reported not a few months ago, I think, that people don't have to can claim benefits without ever actually actively seeking for work either. But the point you mentioned is quite interesting, Philip, when you talk about people having long COVID and being too lazy to get out of the house. Because now we're living in this era of remote working, aren't we, as well? So despite the fact that people can work from their home, they still are choosing not to do so. It is interesting. Look, it only takes around 3 months usually to change someone's way of life, or indeed to change a society's way of life. COVID lockdowns provided much more than that. We had 2 years essentially of people living at home and not working. One of my own cousins went through this and didn't really have the motivation to go back to work because they got so used to it and so comfortable staying at home. I think it is a serious problem. There's another issue here too, of course, which we should also acknowledge, and that's of course the NHS backlog as well. When you have so many millions of appointments that have been missed or delayed, important surgeries, and people going undiagnosed for a long time. I'm sure there are some people genuinely who are suffering at home and they simply haven't had their causes addressed, or they've led to more serious health problems. So we shouldn't be too flippant about all of that side of things. But yes, generally there is something that's gone on. We know for a fact people over 50 now, that is the demographic in this country more than anywhere else in the G7, that we're having a problem getting over 50s back into the workplace. And the solution of the government, rather than trying to address those, is to rely on cheap labour. We even have the Chancellor of the Exchequer now, Jeremy Hunt, who has actually explicitly said that we need to have immigration as at least a short-term solution to all this.
I think also there's a difference, isn't there? There's a medicalisation of the usual stresses and strains of life, and the idea that everybody's under stress. So if things aren't going exactly as I want them to do, or I'm having to work really hard, then I'm under stress, then that's a pathology, then I can stay off work. And I think there's a whole, that's not just employees and employers, that's GPs as well, who will give you a note for pretty much anything. So that whole kind of anxiety and depression culture, and I think it is a culture, feeds massively into it as well. It's very difficult to say, isn't it? Oh well, I'm anxious and depressed. Well, come into work. You can't do that. It's one of those things.
Yes, I agree. It's one of the ways in which we live now culturally is that you can't sort of have a belief based on a hunch or on anecdotal evidence. It's got to always have data, and this doesn't have sort of data in a way. But I sort of agree with you that it's not just the pathologizing of small things. It's also like a, dare I say, just sort of, there's a kind of belief now in, if I say weakness, it sounds terrible, doesn't it? But certainly not a belief in strength.
Well, I'd like to have compared these stats with, say, 1946 to 1950, right after the Second World War, when people really genuinely did have reasons to have mental health issues when your entire livelihood is lying in rubble around you and you've lost members of your own family. And of course, we didn't have the sort of welfare benefits then that we have now. And surely, and we know for a fact, you didn't have the same degree of weakness and apathy that was present then. Yeah. But of course, it's important to remember, it's not just 2.5 million people. Those 2.5 million claiming benefits are those who are doing it for health reasons. But there are 5.2 million people claiming out of work benefits, and it's costing the Exchequer 26 billion pounds a year. And so when we worry about our economic growth in this country and the fact that it is stagnating, it's no surprise when you have over 10% of the working population economically inactive, being bailed out or being supported by the Treasury. So if we want to have a strong functioning economy, we need to get these people back into work. When we have 1 million vacancies and you have at least 2.5 million people inactive, it seems quite obvious that you can easily fill the 1 million vacancies we have without importing labour, but actually reskilling and retraining people, and also making the benefits system work more effectively, because it's not an incentive right now to go into work, because you will lose those benefits if you go into work. And so if there's a way to ensure and guarantee that your benefits won't reduce, at least you'll be able to start people on that road to employment and to dignity.
Exactly. I was going to say it's an unhealthy situation.
Yeah, but dignity, Rafe, you see, I mean, I totally get what you're saying, but that is an unknown concept today. The idea of dignity in actually going out and working almost at anything rather than being on the state. It's just unheard of. People wouldn't know what you're talking about.
Well, it's this sense of stoicism as well. The idea that you will do your job no matter what, and it feeds into what you were talking about before, which we tend to kind of champion and idolize fragility. Fragility is somehow sophisticated. Fragility, you're clever if you're fragile. There are lots of connotations that come along with that, but economically, culturally and psychologically, it's very, very bad for us as a country.
But what do you know when you say about getting people back into work? I mean, I think it was a shocking error, was it not, to even have that lockdown thing with the furlough scheme and everything? Because once you do something like that, it's the devil's own job to sort of. We're sitting here in Westminster, and just up the road is Whitehall. Half of them, if at least, are not back. Civil servants. How do you get people back other than just simply saying, well, look, you've got 6 months basically to find a job or whatever it might be. After that, your benefits are going to cease. I mean, you say that people don't even have to be looking for work anymore. It's unbelievable. I mean,
And let's not make any mistake about this. The furlough scheme, which was so lauded and was essential because of the lockdown, but furlough essentially is benefits. So people have got used to that whole idea. I sit on my arse and I watch television and I'm getting a check every week or every month, however it works. That sets in the benefit mentality. Actually, this is more comfortable than going out and working. And that's basically a lot of the reason that people over 50 got comfortable with all of this. So yes, you do have to, as I just said, you need to restructure the benefit system so that people don't get penalised for going to work, as is too often the case. Either they earn less working than they do from benefits, or they lose their benefits if they go into the workplace. That needs to be changed. And yes, there has to be, I think, a much stricter application of the rules, and people do have to be properly tested as to whether they're deserving of benefits. And I think there's far too much looseness there. But one of the problems here, of course, it's one of these, I don't don't know what you call it, catch-22s, because there aren't enough people working on benefits in the welfare system to actually check up on people. You would think there would be a solution there somewhere, wouldn't you?
Yes, exactly. But it's sort of it also, what's depressing about it is the admission that it's not just tacit anymore, it's actually there, that in fact immigration therefore is the answer to this. That's what they're saying.
Yeah,
we're going to carry on as before.
That's
really.
that's a dreadful. That's the worst response to this problem you could possibly have, because it's just going to compound the problem. People are just we're going to have a two-tier society of low-skill immigrant workers. We're going to have, I'm not quite sure of the demographic, but a lot of kind of 50-plus-year-olds just staying at home, being completely inactive. All that experience, all that expertise just sat there, because people don't want to get out of their comfort zone. And I'm not actually using that metaphorically. I'm using that literally. They don't want to leave the house. The fact that we come to this situation, and for those of us, who work around the clock, it's really annoying, as you both do.
Well, the point I always make out also is that we did manage to staff our restaurants before the 1990s. We had full industry. All right, yes, okay. We went off to the Caribbean to get bus conductors and people on London Transport. But by and large, and if you watch old films, the old Char Lady, right? There was always an East End woman, if it was in London, who was doing those duties of cleaning and cleaning the lavatories and doing it in people's houses and so forth. But the children and the grandchildren don't want to do those jobs anymore because they don't pay enough. You have to actually increase the salaries of people doing those jobs if you want to attract British workers to do those jobs, as well as tackle the indolence and the laziness of people too, to a large degree. But when I went to Liverpool, for example, I was amazed at how everybody there was from Liverpool who was doing those jobs. The hotel cleaners were all from Liverpool. Everybody you saw, because it has a very low immigrant population there. And I thought, well, what's happened to the working classes of London that they're actually not engaged in those jobs too? There has to be a way to attract them back in.
Physically they've gone.
Physically they're gone too. But
But
they were coming from, taxi drivers come in from Essex as well, don't they? But there just needs to be a way to make those jobs that were once filled by the working classes and others attractive again to those populations.
That idea of dignity that you were saying. I think there's dignity in any kind of work. It's much more dignified to clean toilets than to just sit on your backside at home.
I mean, before we start to sound, there's that famous sketch in Monty Python, you were lucky. We grew up in Yorkshire, yes. Before we start to sound too much like that. What do you think of the idea that actually there's something more fundamental going on here, of what I would call utter meaninglessness and exhaustion? So in other words, you're going to get people who just say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm depressed, I can't go. But when you get en masse this kind of behavior, it seems to me that it's like, it's just too much. We're battered to death. It's just one damn thing after another.
Yeah.
And I just wonder whether there is a form of cultural exhaustion there.
I think there is, but I think the word culture is important there, because there's also the idea of community and society, and community and society is so fragmented now, people don't feel as though they need to contribute by working. You contribute to your society because you are part of a society, you're part of a community. If you don't feel that, if your life is, for example, all online, or you don't know your neighbours, or you live in a part of a city or a town which is, populated by absolutely different kinds of people, then you're not going to feel as though you want to contribute.
Yes. No, I think that's a very, very important point. Yeah, fragmentation, a sense of a lessening of the sense of the kind of communal. Also, peer pressure. Peer pressure is entirely gone.
Yeah.
So the idea of shame, the idea of shame, you'd all know I'm not going down. Oh, people used to sort of actually, hide the fact they were signing on. I mean, amazingly, back in my youth.
Well, it's interesting actually, if you watch television and so forth, how we've had over the last 30, 40 years a popularization of people on benefits, of people who don't care, Channel 4 comedies and so forth, the royal family, which I enjoy very much, but all of this is actually celebrating lifestyles and cultures that aren't healthy, and it makes them more acceptable because people are being exposed to them all the time. Whereas you contrast that to the era before that, and it wasn't. It was about strivers. It was about, it was just about people having very productive lives and healthy lives. And now we sort of celebrate the couch potato, the things like Gogglebox and so forth. It's just all the whole idea of just sitting there watching television or being on benefits. If you watch these soap operas on ITV.
Can you imagine, there was a time, there used to be plays about it, where men would go out in the morning with their case and suit rather than the wife know that they'd been fired or something. It's just another universe, isn't it? Speaking of other universes, Germany now. Now this is really quite serious. I don't know if you've read about this, but it's just very recent. Is that there have been calls, or should we say hints as well, from high up, i.e. the German president, for example, that in fact the AfD, which you might know is now, well, in the polls, it's the second party in Germany, should be banned. For the benefit of our viewers, Rafe, can you sort of fill in the AfD emerged, about 15 years ago, didn't they? And they're now on about, I think they were voted for by about 10% of people.
That's right, and they're now between 1/5 to a quarter of the German population would vote for them if there were an election held tomorrow. AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, which is really the populist party, the main populist party in Germany, functioning, I suppose, the way that UKIP did here, a decade ago, when you saw the huge explosion of support for UKIP. Now, as we saw with UKIP and with the Brexit Party, we've seen the mainstream media and the main political parties trying to other them by saying that they are beyond the pale and they are extreme, much the same way that we heard, even we still hear today about GB News, for example, the same arguments. Now, there's no denying there are radical elements within the AfD that are unpalatable and are clearly overtly racist, but they're a fringe minority within that party, and the party has grown to 20, 21, 22%, not because suddenly there are 22% of fascists in Germany, it's because there are a significant demographic there, as here, who feel that they're not being spoken for or represented by mainstream political parties. So it's become the party for the disaffected, people who are concerned about the same issues that we have here, particularly mass migration. And that's why you're seeing in places like Thüringen and other regions of Germany which have significant problems with the housing of illegal immigrants, a surge in support for this party. But the German constitution is just celebrated its 75th anniversary, and we've had the German president, who's supposed to be neutral in much the same way that our king is neutral, saying that the rarely known about clause in the constitution allows the state to close down political parties if they're deemed to be a threat to democracy.
This is called defensive democracy.
Defensive democracy. Now, this came in 1948 because there were so many Nazis alive at the time, and there was a general real threat. So you could see why, at that time, given what happened there was a need for that. But the idea that a perfectly legitimate political party expressing the mainstream views of almost a quarter of the population should be silenced. There's no threat to democracy, which is the requirement of the constitution, but yet we've had Der Spiegel, one of the main newspapers, calling for this as well. We've had members of the SDP in Germany and the Christian Democrats supporting this neutral president in this, coded language he used, but we all know, referring to AfD, is very threatening and very worrying. And all it does to do these sorts of things just serve to convince those who would vote for the AfD that yes, there is a conspiracy out to silence them, and that all the other parties are singing from the same hymn sheet and are determined to do everything to thwart the real needs of these people.
Isn't it, AfD is predominantly an anti-immigration party, isn't it? Wouldn't that be right to say?
Yes.
It's like that's its main plank.
That's its main plank, but it appeals to the same things we have in this country too, in terms of the economy and so forth.
Yeah, just reading this story, it just makes me think of other things, and it's a key thing that reflects so much in the culture, and it's that there's a central and very aggressive contradiction, isn't there? That to save democracy, as they say they want to do, they've got to be authoritarian in which to do that. And we live in a culture which that constantly happens in every area of public life, doesn't it? So to be inclusive, I'm just thinking about Comedy Unleashed, the story where they've just been thrown out of a venue in Edinburgh, at the Edinburgh Fringe, because this this venue wants to be inclusive, so they're going to exclude comedy.
It's Graham Lyne.
It's Graham Lyne and Andrew Doyle. So that's one contradiction that people buy into. Another one is to be anti-racist, you have to be overtly racist, and that's probably going to touch on a story that we might talk about in a minute. But we navigate all of these very aggressive contradictions, and most people just accept it. You cannot accept that, to achieve democracy and to protect democracy, you have to marginalise, one of the biggest parties in the country. It's just absurd.
Well, and also, of course, the fact is, if you ban the party, it doesn't make the underlying issues go away.
No,
the people will still have the same concerns, and in fact, they'll just be increasingly radicalised. I mean, this is what gets me, we're often told that the reason so many Muslims are extremists or become terrorists is because of seeing what Western governments have done in the Middle East. Well, I would say what Western governments are doing in their own homeland is radicalizing the populations of Europe, and so it's no surprise that we're seeing this. If they really wanted to make the AfD go away or minimize the AfD, they would simply need to address the issues. If they got a handle on immigration, if they got a handle on inflation and the economic crisis that's happening, if they try to erode the divisions that are dividing society, then you would see a natural hemorrhaging of support away from those populations who've come to it relatively recently and back to the mainstream parties. It's not rocket science.
But in order to do that, they have to change everything.
Yeah.
Because as I was saying before, everything's connected. It's a whole ideological framework that they have to dismantle, so it's never going to happen.
But we're seeing the Tory party now in its dying embers realising that, right? And now the Tory party is trying to act more right-wing by throwing these dead cats 2 minutes to midnight on the electoral cycle.
The thing is with the AfD, first of all, they got up to 12.5%, I think, in the aftermath of that huge migration of Angela Merkel, the million people. They went down to 10 something, but now, as you say, they're up there again on in the polls. Why have they suddenly gone up?
Well, because Germany is experiencing very much the same sort of issues that we're experiencing here with immigration.
I would have thought, wouldn't you, if 1 million people were coming, that would have been the point. Wow.
But you also have to remember that with Germany also, there are great economic crises now, and the economy was always the most stable thing in Germany. It was its greatest badge of honour.
That's the
they're in recession. They've got inflation running rampant, and of course you still have the issue where you have people's towns now have lots of immigrants in sports halls, in community centres being housed, and people say, look, it's in times of economic crisis, of course, we know that those sorts of things become more real.
I mean, what are the chances of it actually being banned, do you think? I mean, is this just blowharding?
I'm tempted to say it won't be banned, because if they do ban it, I'm sure there'll be riots in the streets. You can't just take away a party that so many people are invested in, so many people would vote for, and so many people will vote for. If you just take that away, then you tear the whole thing down.
It will be a terrible affront to democracy, and I would hope that
the whole thing down.
The Western governments elsewhere would condemn this outright, irrespective of what side of the divide they stand on. And I would hope that this will be a big test for German courts, because the AfD would appeal this to the courts, and the governments would have to show that the AfD is an actual real threat to democracy. And I've not seen anything that they've done that would mean that they would tear down and dismantle the constitution and the democratic system or the electoral system. And you have to remember, of course, that they're nowhere near to being a majority anyway. They're very, very far short of that.
Well, no, but of course it's just a psychological thing, isn't it? All they need to do is to get a reasonable amount more. I'm not sure of how many seats they have now, but we're in this country used, aren't we, to people having like 1 or 2 seats. So if you get over 20, you're doing I would have thought quite well. Would you vote for them if you were in Germany?
I don't know. It's difficult to say. I'd need to study them a lot more before I could make a decision like that.
If I understood them to be the German version of UKIP, then UKIP as it was, then yes, I probably would.
You see, as I understand it, UKIP, it was more of a pujadist. It was like a Gaullist party. It was like a sort of small town English party. But the AfD has always had this thing which the National Front in France had, you know, where the Holocaust denial around the edges, you know. I mean, so, but none of this changes the central point. Is that, you know, I suppose, is it understandable? Is it understandable? I suppose in a way, given the history of the country, maybe it's understandable that they're doing it. I'm not saying it's right, but you can see where it's coming from.
Oh yeah, well you can see why it's in the constitution for the reasons I explained. Historically, because there were so many real forget neo-Nazis, there were genuine Nazis on the ground at the time, and we know of course how sensitive Germans are. That's why you have the banning of the swastika and so forth in Germany, which, you know, I wouldn't support it in this country out of freedom, although I'd love to see the hammer and sickle also banned here ideally, but I know that as a free speecher I can't do that. So we understand that the sentimentality there. Also the Germans loathe themselves more than anyone else in Europe. This whole idea of cultural loathing, which we think is bad here, is nothing compared to Germany, where they actually despise not just their Nazi history, but also their Prussian history as well. And so, so anyway.
But just in terms of common sense, if something's going to compound the problem, if something's going to erode confidence in the state, if something's going to erode confidence in the system, then doing that is obviously the most stupid thing to do.
Speaking of sort of division and such, like finishing this week on this story about a new festival in sort of being championed by the Lord Mayor of London. No, he's not the Lord Mayor, sorry, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. We still have a Lord Mayor in the City of London, but anyway, called Black on the Square, which is a festival devoted to the black culture. I'm not paraphrasing. These are the actual words used. So it's up to you to decide which black culture we're talking about. You know, are we talking about Ghanaian? Are we talking about Nigerian? What are we talking about?
Well, according to him, it's just one homogenous whole.
Yes.
You know, the interesting thing, there isn't too much about that in the papers. There's a press release, I think, that the Evening Standard pretty much just kind of published. But one of the things that really strikes me about it, the way they're presenting this, it's the most cliched, tired version of what people think black culture, you know, that homogenous thing, black culture should be. Interestingly, though, they've thrown an LGBTQI++ thing in there as well. So it's LGBTQI++ for POC, you know.
So what do you mean? What, they're taking part, or what?
Well, there's a platform, queer. I can't remember what it's called now, but there's a platform specifically for people of colour. To meet and indulge in queer lifestyles.
Right.
So there's lots
It's
of
going to go down really well with some of the Jamaicans and Nigerians.
There's loads of rappers. It's all of the cliched stuff, you know. It's all of the stereotypical stuff that people think you have to like if you're black, and it's actually a real insult to black.
You see, I could understand. You know, I mean, I could understand if you wanted to do a festival on, you know, the Nigerian community's contribution to
or the Caribbean, you could do.
or whatever it is. But just to say black, it's just like saying white. You know, it's the same thing.
Well, that's what I was thinking. You know, I mean, you know, St. Lucia and, you know, Sudan. There's not much you have in common there, or Burundi and Brixton.
Yes.
You know, and I was just trying to think. Imagine we had a thing in Trafalgar Square where you had, I don't know, the Dutch and New Zealanders and Italians and French Canadians all together. Wouldn't make a damn bit of sense, would it? People were going, what's going on?
Yes.
You throw the Hungarians in there, and you've got the whole thing.
And some Swiss in there, and you've got to write next. But that's the problem. But firstly, of course, it would never happen, because the idea of having a white culture celebration is so far beyond the pale. I mean, you'd be expelled, exiled from London just for just suggesting it, you know. And it reminded me actually of, but I would like to see actually, for once, an English celebration of English culture. But even that's beyond the pale now, to expect the mayor to actually have a wholesome celebration of English folk music, English classical music, you know, poetry readings, drama that we've done in the past. That would be a wonderful spectacle to see. You know, it reminds me of when Ken Livingstone was mayor, and I wrote a piece at the time called Red Ken Goes Green, where he gave his full-hearted support and funding for a St. Patrick's Day parade, but he said that a St. George's Day parade would be racist. In London, the capital of England, you know, I mean, the nonsense.
Yes, no, exactly. Well, you see, the thing is that the case for St George's Day celebration, which there is actually technically one, but the case for it is getting thinner because, of course, you know, white British are a minority of 37% in London now. But no, I totally agree. There is this thing that they do now on St George's Day, but it's a kind of, it passes without much comment. You know, no one knows it's really there. You know, and I think you know, a few Morris dancers gather and everything, but I mean, you know,
but it's too cliched, and it's not the real sort of a thing.
A few pearly kings and queens,
a couple of knights on horseback, and that's it.
Exactly.
But there needs to be a proper celebration of true English culture and of England's achievements as well, its history. You can see grand panoramas, you know, all the sort of things that you would have expected to see in the 1970s and 60s and 50s. Particularly because, sorry, just to go on, because London, remember, is the capital of England. So even though the majority of London may no longer be white British, England still is majority white British, and you would expect your capital city. And you know, when Britain left the EU, they took the EU flag down outside City Hall, and leaving it blank, and you had the Union flag and the City of London Assembly flag, and there's empty flag. And I wrote to City Hall and I said, it's about time you put up the St George's Cross. And what do? They put up another flag of City of London Assembly.
No, exactly. And in fact, during that period, it used to be question after question, the Mayor's question time, when is that flag going to come down? He kept it up for as long as he could.
The EU flag, yeah.
Yes, and he said, "My beloved EU." I remember him sort of saying, and I just thought, you know, it got to the point where everyone was joking about it, you know. But I mean, I think what I would say when it comes to Trafalgar Square is just give the poor square a break for a while. I'm sick of seeing things covering it every time you walk past. Just let it breathe and just be a square for a while, don't you think?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think is this going to happen? I think is it the 2nd of September?
Yes.
It's quite soon, isn't it? So bearing in mind what happens every year at Notting Hill Carnival, you know, when there might well be, because this is people getting together. And the impetus of the whole thing is simply about colour of skin. People are, you know, not connected in meaningful ways, I don't think. It'll just be interesting to see what the fallout of this is and see what happens.
Yes. Well, look, on that note, thanks very much, Philip. Thanks. Good to see you again, both of you. And well, you're actually going to be away again, aren't you, for a while?
I'm going to be away for a couple of weeks, and then I'll be back to regular appearances.
All right. Well, watch this space. We will see you next time, and we'll look forward to it. And in the meantime, enjoy the rest of the summer. Bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below, or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.